an absolute treasure trove of information. Primary sources regarding Theodore Roosevelt can be found by checking out this thing in section 21.4. When Roosevelt leaves office and is succeeded by William Howard Taft, who you can't mention William Howard Taft without somebody mentioning that he is the hugest president of all time at 6 feet tall and 340 pounds. And yet Roosevelt towers over him in the background, watching him, hoping that he will continue Roosevelt's policies. In some ways he does, but when he doesn't, when he fails to satisfy the sort of shadow former president in the background, as you can read about in 21.4, Roosevelt doesn't keep quiet about it. Roosevelt has no problem. Often, it's in 2023 where we're in an almost unique situation where a former president is running for re-election. We may be losing sight of this, but generally speaking, it's rare to see a former president directly criticize a sitting president. But Theodore Roosevelt had no problem doing that. And Taft had other problems beside Roosevelt. Political infighting in his own party is going on, and Taft's power is much more limited. He's less popular and he's less powerful than Roosevelt. And the progressive ring, the Roosevelt, the hardcore Rooseveltists, and even those who are more progressive than Roosevelt, are moving further and further and further away from Taft. As in midterm elections, he starts supporting far less progressive Republican candidates, more mainline, more conservative party candidates. His biggest political blunder came in the area of land conservation. And look, you heard and you read about how Roosevelt founded the national park system, and how important conservation and wildlife and the outdoors is to Roosevelt. You can just picture him turning beet red in the background as he watches Taft sell off millions of acres of federal land to a company that he'd previously worked for. So, man, are we going back to Gilded Age corruption? Roosevelt now is hanging out in Africa, but when he gets back, he starts referring to the current president, to William Howard Taft, as a fathead and a puzzlewit, and announced that he's going to run for re-election, a third term. But he's not able to score the Republican nomination, so he breaks off and he forms his own party, the Progressive Party. And in true Roosevelt fashion, someone tries to assassinate him and shoot him, and it just pisses him off. Roosevelt is shot, and his injury is not very extreme, because the bullet has to pass through his eyeglass case. So before he seeks medical attention, he goes ahead and gives his campaign speech. He says, "It takes more than a bullet to kill a bull moose," and so his Progressive Party takes on the nickname the Bull Moose Party. Like, you can't shoot this guy. No wonder Sasquatch didn't stand a chance. You can't shoot the guy. He just walks it off. But now, his new Progressive Party is just pulling votes away from the Republican Party. It's not really impacting the Democratic Party. So with the Republican Party split, the Democrats now have a shot for regaining the White House for the first time since 1896, and so they nominate Woodrow Wilson. He's going to be a huge deal in some of our upcoming lessons. He's a history professor and former president of Princeton University, and he comes across very academic and professorial, and he's painted as an outsider to Washington, and Wilson carries the day in 1912. He wins the election with over 6 million votes. Roosevelt gets 4 million, and only 3.5 million for the official Republican candidate, the incumbent President Taft. The Woodrow Wilson, by the way, you can read more about the 1912 election in this thing here in section 21.4, but the Wilson presidency is going to be incredibly eventful. When he took office in 1913, he immediately met with Congress to outline his new freedom agenda for how progressive interests could best be preserved. So he's a different political party, but he's part of this wave of progressivism. His plan was simple: regulate the banks and big businesses, lower the tariff rates to increase international trade, and increase competition in the interest of consumers. When competition increases, the customers benefit because it drives down the prices. The businesses lose out, so they're not big fans of Woodrow Wilson. He passes a law that reinstates the federal income tax, which funds which provides the federal government more funding to take a more active role in line with his progressive agenda. Late in 1913, he signs the Federal Reserve Act to regulate the banking industry and establish a federal banking system. Remember how the Gilded Age presidents were entirely on the leash of big business. Now, presidents like Roosevelt and Wilson have cut that leash, and the federal government is growing muscles and teeth and claws. Having been pretty successful in his domestic progressive policies, which again you read about in section 21.4 of the OpenStax, it's now time for him to turn his attention to foreign affairs, as war was quickly encompassing Europe. What war, you ask? That would be World War I. Spoiler alert. Don't think that we're only spending 20 seconds on World War I. We're only spending 20 seconds on World War I today, because World War I gets its own lesson here coming up pretty soon. What I want to do with the rest of our time in this lesson and in this playlist is I want to review everything that we've discussed in the playlist, and I want to do it, this will be a big relief, by not doing it. I'm a firm believer in that it's good to hear multiple perspectives, multiple voices on the same information. So we will conclude this lesson by turning to every social studies teacher's best friend, John Green. The next video in the playlist will be the Crash Course U.S. History entry on the Progressive Era.